Sony held a showcase for the PlayStation 5 a while ago now because I'm so hot on trending topics, but what a showcase it was. So many games were shown that I'm excited for, like Spider-Man, Miles Morales, Resident Evil 8/Village, Hogwarts Legacy, but what really blew my bollocks off was how they burst onto the stream like,
I am here!
Revealing Final Fantasy XVI right off the bat. That really got my blood pumping, and anyone would have thought that I had lockjaw with the way that my mouth was just stuck gaped open. I couldn't believe it. I still can't. But it's here. The trailer's here. It's real. I've watched it many times, and I want to go over with you some of the things I noticed, things I'm looking forward to, and some of the things I'm hopeful for. Damn, that's a lot of things! But before we move on to the trailer, what do you think of when you hear Final Fantasy? Is it fat cats, giant chickens, emo boy bands, or disappointment? I'm just kidding. Final Fantasy XIII was a great game. It does not deserve the hate that it gets. We have the famed story of the first Final Fantasy being Square's last attempt at trying to make money because they're on the verge of bankruptcy. Who even knows if that's true anymore? I've also heard that Sakaguchi just wanted both the names of the title to begin with F, and Fighting Fantasy was taken, so he went with Final Fantasy. Maybe you think of turn-based battles. I know that's usually what I would think of. They scrapped that after 10. 12 didn't use turn-based. It had some sort of turn-based, but not the traditional sense. 13, that was kind of turn-based, but again, trying to make it more active. All the modern ones are more active, and obviously we'll see soon that Final Fantasy XVI's really gone for the action RPG route. All the different character classes that you could get. You have a thief, a warrior, monk, you got black mage, white mage, red mage, blue mage. I can sing a rainbow. What deep and emotional stories and characters. I still cry every time at the end of Final Fantasy X. That moment when Titus, whatever you want to call him, I usually say Titus, when he's hugging Yuna and then he just like walks through her, like, oh man. And then like when he jumps off the airship and then he high fives Jecht. He gives his dad a high five. Oh god. There's a running theme throughout all of the game. You got your guaranteed crystals, which we'll touch on soon. There's something in this trailer. And many people say that the Final Fantasy series is always known for pushing the limits of the technology of the day. Like the amount of character sprites rendered on screen on the NAS, or the ridiculous hair physics. Square-Enix are big on the hair. I mean, just look at Tomb Raider when they was bragging about how every individual hair is animated. Have you seen the people in Final Fantasy, the way their hair moves? Like, so flowy and wavy. And I've also heard that the Warp Strike that they used in Final Fantasy XV was actually pretty difficult to pull off. And I commend the effort because that was actually a really good addition. And it looks like we got some of that in this one as well. But let's get into the meat of everything, yeah? Let's talk about this trailer, because there's a lot in there that I want to talk about that I'm excited for. And ooh. So we see that it's being developed by Creative Business Unit 3, very creative name, and it's being produced by Naoki Yoshida, or Yoshi P. And he was the one that was brought in from the disastrous launch of Final Fantasy XIV, and he pretty much turned it all around. I would say that 16's in pretty good hands. Instantly, as soon as you see the art, I mean, I knew instantly, as soon as I saw it, you recognise the art style of a mainline Final Fantasy game. It's been the same since 10. For good or bad? Who knows? I like to see all different art styles. I like to see them switch it up. It will be good to see different things. If you look 6, 7, 8, 9 and 10 all had different art styles from each other. 5 games in a row with a different art style. Well, Square's made plenty of spin-off Final Fantasy games that have wonderful art styles. I mean, look at World of Final Fantasy. That game is absolutely beautiful. So I think they're allowed to deviate because they also have the Final Fantasy VII sub-series and that has the same art style. I think they could take a shift and do a different art style for a mainline Final Fantasy. I think it will work well for them. And looking at these soldiers sitting around the campfire, at one point one turns around and says, "Our kind do not question orders, we follow them." And when he says this, one of the guys puts his hand to the branding on his face. Now I'm wondering if that possibly means that that guy, I don't know his name, that character, possibly feels like he doesn't belong where he is. Maybe he is infiltrating them and he's not their kind. Maybe he wants to break away and not be a part of their kind. We don't know, but I think there's going to be a lot to do with identity with that character. I think there's going to be a lot of him questioning his identity. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that. And we also have a piece where it says,
"You all know the target. Shiva's dominant. And only the dominant."
Shiva, of course, is a summon or an eidolon, depending on what Final Fantasies you've played. Here, they're all called icons. From what I gather in the trailer, the summoners are referred to as dominants. What also looks very, very interesting is I don't think that you actually summon an icon in this game. I think the summoners, or the dominants, actually transform into the icons. I think they're brought out of them and they become these big, especially for Titan, like this hulking mass of just raw power. Of course, Shiva, she's looking a babe as usual. And I believe we saw 4 icons in this trailer. We got Titan, we got Shiva, Ifrit, and Phoenix. Now, I didn't see any more. I'm assuming there would be more. I'd like to see Ramuh again. He's good. I like the lightning one. Obviously, we're going to have a Bahamut. Bahamut's in all of them. Bahamut's like a staple of the series. Like, he's going to be there. Bahamut, Shiva, and Ifrit. Those 3 are like in every single one. So in this world, it seems odd that Phoenix and Ifrit would coexist. Because at one point, one of the soldiers says,
"Second icon of fire. But that's impossible."
It seems as though there has never been 2 fire icons exist at the same time. I'm very interested in seeing what comes out of that. Why they couldn't, why they now are. I'm looking forward to see what they say. This guy. This fucking guy. Look at him. It's Noctis with a haircut. He looks exactly the same. Why have they gone with this generic looking guy? I'm just going to refer to him as Guy. Hey, Guy. Why? Look, they need to have something to show off in the trailer. I'm hoping that for once they maybe add in some sort of character creation system. You've never been able to do that outside of choosing your name, usually, in Final Fantasy, which they took out for the modern titles because of voice acting. Even still, it'd be nice to actually just choose your hair, choose your eyes, but they've gone with this really generic looking emo boy band, like Noctis's offspring looking thing. It just would have been nice just to have some character creation, but that's the guy we got. Now, of course, combat is one of the most important things in a Final Fantasy game. Am I wrong? And it seems to me, from this trailer, that we have a similar ability to Noctis's Warp Dodge / Warp Strike from Final Fantasy XV, which is great because I loved that. I loved that part of the combat in Final Fantasy XV. So I'm excited to see that return here. It doesn't look as flashy, but I mean, like, obviously they're not finished with the game. They could add more particles because I know how much Square-Enix loves particles. But interestingly enough, something that I've not seen anyone else mention is I thought the combat looked like a nice cross between Final Fantasy XV and The Witcher 3. I think it's all the fluid motion with the swords. Magic looks easy to use, much like Final Fantasy XV. I wonder if we could use more than just like one spell or something that we've mapped to a specific button. Maybe we could bring up a quick sub-menu to choose which spell to throw. But from the trailer, it looks very easy to use. So that's very good for switching between attacking and then magic. I like that. The camera looks a lot closer as well. Like, it's more personal to the battle. It wasn't extremely far zoomed out like it was in Final Fantasy XV. And then you had horrible scenarios. Oh, hey, the action's happening over here, right behind this bush. That you oh yeah, we're getting it. Oh no, you've been hit. No, we're getting him. Let's bring the no. We're just fighting here. Don't worry, we are here. I really would have liked to have seen some UI in this as well. I mean, they're probably still trying to figure that out, but it would have been nice just to see maybe some of the buttons they've got mapped for the way they're doing combat and just how they think the health and magic is going to look. Now, I'm wondering if this guy is a dominant, because you see at one time he uses the Phoenix wing, so maybe dominants, instead of fully transforming into the summon, they can use like abilities from the icon. I'm wondering if he is Phoenix, because I don't think Joshua is Phoenix. I think he's Ifrit, because then you also see that other guy with the face brand, and he has like Titan arms. He's gonna, so I'm thinking he is Titan, which would make sense because they're after Shiva, and Shiva and Titan are fighting at the beginning of the trailer. I also noticed that only one-on-one encounters were shown. You didn't see groups of enemies anywhere. That's very different for Final Fantasy. And, I mean, I'm kind of on board with that. That sounds pretty cool, to be honest. I think one-on-one encounters would be more intense. I think the battles would possibly be more grounded, if that's the right word. You know, maybe showing the main characters as not being so overpowered and possibly provide more of a challenge. I mean, from the beginning of the trailer, obviously, we get a peek at the voice acting. I had to change that logo. It was making my camera go all weird and fucky. Like, almost straight away from this trailer, you get a peek at the voice acting, and I think someone's been watching too much Game of Thrones. They all sound very like bangers and mash, overly common British sort of acting. From this trailer, it looks, there's a lot more blood. It's a lot more gorier than usual. I'm not saying it's going to be some weird gore fest, but there was definitely more blood for a Final Fantasy game. However, I did notice at one point there's this big splash of blood that comes up, and I was thinking, huh? That needs work. It's like, it looks like plasticine. My biggest thing that I noticed was
the legacy of the crystals has shaped our history for long enough.
Now, that can mean within the context of the game, because they do mention the mother crystal that they need to get. So I'm thinking within the context of the game, they're going to be doing shit with crystals, trying to obtain someone's crystal, trying to steal someone else's crystal to help themselves, like they always do. Or does this mean Final Fantasy XVI is breaking away from series tradition? Because like I said earlier, every single Final Fantasy revolves around crystals in some way. Like, that is a staple of the series. That's big. That is big if they're changing that. But then how much are they changing that? Because it might be a case of like early on the crystal gets destroyed and then we're starting this life without relying on crystals. Maybe they do that to like dip their toe in. I think people are sick of crystals now. I'm not sick of crystals, I'll happily take crystals, but that bit does interest me. So what are we hoping to see in this? I'm going to get serious just for 1 second. I'm really hoping that we see playable and well-written women. The series is usually really good at being very diverse, and obviously Final Fantasy XV kind of like, where were they? You had Cindy. Oh, Cindy. That's pretty much all you had. Luna Freya was shit. She did cool. But the rest of the series, they're usually very good at writing diverse characters. So I'm really hoping that we do see that in this, because literally all they showed in this trailer was this fucking guy. I really hope that we get more party members, because what we saw in the trailer was just, like I said, one-on-one battles. But I'd really like to have a party of characters. That's another thing. Just a series stable is just having a whole party of characters. Like, I want to be able to give commands. I don't just want to control one person. I want to control the whole party. I want to give commands to everyone. I mean, whether they're permanent party members like you get in most of the games, or whether you just have party members that kind of drop in and drop out for specific quests that you go on. It'd just be nice not to be on your own for the entire game, because then that opens up for larger scale battle, because one-on-one is nice, personal. It would be good for bosses, but I think to be having one-on-one battles throughout the whole game, yeah. But even on a grander scale, like perhaps taking on an army. Like, I know obviously with limitations you weren't actually fighting some sort of army, but like the start of Final Fantasy X, when you're fighting all of the little fucking Sin's little bat things, can't remember the name of them, fuck, but when you're fighting those, like, it felt grand. It felt like you was being swarmed from everywhere, yet you could only really take on 2 or 3 at a time, but it felt grand. So I hope you get something like this, something like that in this one. Now, we don't know what they're really doing with summoning the icons, but Final Fantasy XV summoning was fucking dog shit. I'm hoping you're able to summon in this game at will, whenever you want, like most of the games. And what would also be really nice is if you could control the summon, just like Final Fantasy X. Do you remember that? You know, you summon it and then you actually control the summon, and it was like, oh my god, I'm controlling Bahamut or Ifrit or whatever, and it was so good. Although they're smaller, it would be so good to control them again. But even if you can't, even if it is just the one move thing like 15, it would be good to do it when you wanted, not situation based. It looks very serious, this game. I've noticed the more modern Final Fantasy games tend to go the serious route. They used to have so many fun, light-hearted, goofy moments, and yeah, in Final Fantasy XV, Prompto was an absolute goofball and I loved him. He was one of my favourite characters in the game. But then, like, you have such a charm when you can have these funny moments and just fun characters, and like, everyone doesn't need to be so serious all the time. And they had some light-hearted moments in Final Fantasy VII Remake, but it was still a very serious game, to be honest. I think it's the art style that plays into that quite a bit as well. They've gone for more like a serious looking art style as opposed to the, say, Final Fantasy IX, like the little chibi looking character model. Best game ever made, by the way. So I'd like to see some lighter moments come back into it. Weapons. Weapons are important. I want weapons that you don't have to upgrade. I want weapons that you find, you keep them throughout the game, they have different stats and abilities, and maybe they can teach you different abilities when you equip them, much like Final Fantasy IX. But just stop making me upgrade my weapons. Just let me get new weapons all the time. I love getting new weapons and accessories. I don't want to upgrade them. You make it overly confusing, Square, when you do that. Now, when are we going to see this game? I'm so excited to get my hands on Final Fantasy XVI, and I'm hoping that we see it either next year or early 2022. Now, Jason Schreier has said that this game has already been in development for 4 years, so we're gonna see it sooner than we think. Now, I expected to see it around this time anyway. They're always developing the next one when one's released, so you knew they was developing this when Final Fantasy XV was released. You just knew. They weren't going to leave it that long without announcing a new one. I think Square's learnt from their mistake of announcing games too early. They've said before they have a habit of announcing games too early and then everyone has to wait years and years. So yeah, I'm hoping that we see it either next year or early 2022. Final Fantasy is my favourite series of all time. I've enjoyed every mainline game, yes, even 13, and like I said earlier, it gets way more hate than it deserves, and 12 is criminally underrated. We haven't seen enough of Final Fantasy 16 yet to say, yes, this game will be amazing. But I'm impressed with what I've seen so far, and I do think it's most likely going to be amazing. I can't wait to see what info they drip feed us within the next year or so. But for now, we're just going to have to keep our ear to the ground. What was your takeaway from the trailer, and what are you hoping to see in Final Fantasy XVI? Let's discuss it down in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, then please fondle that like button, and subscribe for discussions all about gaming, past, present and future. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.